Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another edition of our town hall videos. I'm Clint Morris, chair of the Fayette County Democratic Party, and I'm here with Hannah LeGris, who is running for the 3rd District Council for the Lexington Urban County Council. Thank you for joining us, Hannah. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
We've been trying to figure out ways to get candidates in front of voters during this time of social distancing and healthy at home. We thought this would be a way that we could do that safely without exposing everyone to COVID. But our first two questions we just kind of want to give everyone a chance to get to know you as a person and not necessarily as a candidate. Voters like that, and without the opportunities for them to go to events, it's been a little hard. So the first two questions might seem a little weird, but after they're done, we will jump into the policy questions and talk about why you're running for this position. So our first question is, during this time of healthy at home, are there any shows that you're binging, books that you're watching, things you'd like to recommend to voters out there?
Yes, great. So I have to admit, I have had a hard time with the downtown branch of the Lexington Public Library being closed. I usually go there on Saturdays to find new books, especially graphic novels. They have such an amazing collection, but I do have quite a few books that I have been reading in my own home recently. April was National Poetry Month, so I got to revisit a couple of collections. There's one that I think is excellent. It's by Ada Limon, and she is a Kentucky poet by way of California. Her collection, Bright Dead Things, is so good. So I just refinished looking at that. And then I am also rereading the book Normal People by Sally Rooney. And that book happens to have a Hulu show associated with it. So if you like a book or a show, that's the answer. And so I've also continued to read the New Yorker and Harper's. I had fallen behind on some of my traditional reading that I do at the beginning of the campaign, and now I got a little bit of time to catch up. So that's what I've been reading.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. That segues well into our second question. We've all had a little more time on our hands as we have been sheltering and staying healthy at home. Is there anything you've learned about yourself that you want to share with everyone?
Yes. I have traditionally thought of myself as someone who leans toward extroversion. I really enjoy going out in the community, socializing, engaging with people, and that I still enjoy that. But this has been a time when I've really appreciated my home and my neighbors. I've had more time to talk to my neighbors from a distance, from our front porches, and walk through our neighborhood, and that's been really positive. Of course, I had expected to be doing as much canvassing, but the feeling of walking around your neighborhood and just getting to know people on a slower pace has been very good. And then I've also enjoyed writing and being a little more creative and sending letters. These are things I've always liked, but I've had more space to enjoy the process of writing and sending it away to people. So.
Good. Well, thank you for that. So we'll jump into the policy questions now. And what we've done is we opened it up for Democrats in Lexington over the last couple of weeks to share with us questions they had for the various candidates in the various races. And we've narrowed it down to 8 questions for the city council, which was interesting because our other races didn't have as many. So only 7 questions for the other races, 8 for council. So I'll jump right into these, and then at the end, we'll open it up to you to share what else you think folks need to know. So our first question, pressure is building between the desire to maintain the urban service boundary and the escalating cost of housing here in Lexington. How do you think the urban county government should handle Lexington's affordable housing situation over the next 5 years, 15 years, 20 years?
Okay, great. Thank you. I definitely understand the need for more housing options, especially within the urban service boundary. And this, I believe, is an issue that's larger than any one district. It affects people of all different ages and backgrounds, and our affordable housing challenges will worsen unless Lexington is able to address the root causes of affordable housing issues, and unless we work proactively to do that. So I have a couple of suggestions. I suggest advocating for responsible development and focusing on infill, block by block development and equitable investment in our neighborhoods. I also think that work like this involves stakeholders in the city, in the region, in the state, all working together to ensure that plans that we develop for affordable housing and housing in general in our city remain humane and responsible. And I think that that involves building support at the neighborhood level to promote and create affordable housing, that plans that bring residents into the conversation. And in this process, I recognize that development without displacement is very important. So a couple of points along those lines. As you all may well know, you who are watching, in 2015, the Fayette Alliance commissioned a housing survey, and that informed the most recent comprehensive plan. And this survey, part of what this survey found was that low maintenance, evolving format housing, so we're talking duplex, fourplex, condominiums, detached, small homes, can all serve growing community needs. And we can do more there with incorporating some of those recommendations into the comprehensive plan. I also think, second, that it is important for the city to create and fund options for low-income housing in a very intentional way within the master housing plan. And then third, to think about setting up a commission to encourage homeownership as part of the plan, because that assists with wealth accumulation and asset building in our city. I think, as I was kind of mentioning earlier in the answer, that proper execution of this vision, and we're talking about in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, involves public agencies, business owners, tenants, landlords, and homeowners alike in generating neighborhood plans that place human relationships and not just economic interests at the forefront. And the city has a very important role to play when they're thinking about facilitating that process and making sure that it's inclusive before plans develop and then as they are being implemented.
Thank you for that. The next question is sort of related. So Lexington's homeless population has dropped 12.5% in the last couple of years, according to LexCount. Nevertheless, with the potential economic downturn on the horizon, it may be difficult for us to continue that trend. What does the city need to do to ensure access to housing, mental health care, and job opportunities for our homeless or potentially homeless population?
Okay. So it's a multi-part question.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
It's a multi-part issue, and that's important. So so homelessness and housing insecurity, as you insinuated in the question, will continue to be ongoing challenges in Lexington for years to come. And we're very fortunate that the numbers that were reflected in this past survey have been positive. I believe that we need to work hard to protect our community members and to build more robust structures when it comes to housing, as we were discussing a moment ago, mental health, and workforce development. So thinking about housing, I think that this means, number one, continued support for the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention and the partnerships with organizations and the funding therein that already exists. So thinking about grants to Community Action Council, to bluegrass.org, Lexington Rescue Mission, the Hope Center, we need to protect that. The other thing to think about in this equation with housing, number two, is to follow through with some of the existing goals of programs like One Door Lexington and the coordinated entry process. So that's all about promoting participant choice, coordinating homelessness assistance, and then mainstreaming our processes. And that brings me to the third point, which is making sure that people receive assistance quickly and to make homelessness assistance open, transparent, inclusive, and accessible, so legible. And as you mentioned, this question of mental health, and we're thinking about root causes of homelessness as part of this question. This is just one part of the puzzle. I think that as we're thinking about essential services within our city, we have to continue to support mental health programs that help serve so many in our community. So the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the Hope Center, bluegrass.org. And then second, we need to think about continuing the work and being very intentional when we are linking rehoming initiatives with mental health support. So that brings me to the third question, the third part of the question, which is workforce development initiatives and funding. And as a career counselor in my current line of work, I know that this type of work requires innovation, trust, it requires relationship building, and it requires seeing potential in people. And workforce development is also all about opportunity. So I think that by attracting more industries to Lexington, we can help diversify the options available to all citizens. I also think that we have some initiatives that are very positive happening here right now. So continuing to prioritize retraining and empowerment work, and that's the type of work we're seeing at Food Chain with their processing kitchen, with the Urban League, with their fiber optics work, and across the community with other partnerships. And then in the future, we can actually, I think, look to the past for some programs that have really helped us, like with the Mayor's Job Center, which served in multiple areas of workforce development and wraparound workforce prep. But, you know, speaking to this answer, I want to acknowledge that, yes, the proposed budget cuts that we may talk about in this conversation, they might be positioned to affect the funds of programs like the ones that I mentioned, but we still have the chance to build partnerships and remain resilient in that process and creative as we work hard to support everybody in this community. And I also think that we can implement much of what we've learned recently, well, not just recently, but over time, when it comes to coalition building and resilience. Because we have the chance to strengthen and diversify how we manage multifaceted challenges like homelessness in our community. And we're learning a lot about using some of those tools right now.
Thank you. Yeah, a very complicated question. So thank you for that. The third question, I think it will be particularly important to the folks of the 3rd District because of the work that Jake Gibbs had done on his time on council and throughout his life. What role should the city play in encouraging the planting of more trees and native plants to help protect our environment?
Yes, so you certainly can't think about trees in Lexington without thinking about Jake. So I'm glad you mentioned him in this question. And I'm sure that everybody who's running for the 3rd District feels the same way. You know, Jake really showed up and advocated for trees and he demonstrated what an individual council member within our district and in general can do to help support trees and native plantings. He walked around. I've heard multiple neighbors talk about Jake walking around and talking to them about their trees, and he advocated to connect neighbors with experts and with services within the city and with organizations within the city so that if people were interested in learning more about trees and in protecting trees, they knew how. So we're talking about connections like Trees Lexington, with city arborists, with citizens themselves, and with educators. And I think Jake started some really great work right there. And I have to admit that trees are very important to me personally. I was raised on a farm in Mason County, Kentucky by an artist and a conservationist and soil scientist. So planting, identifying, talking about trees, caring for them, and talking about native plants, like this type of engagement has been central to like my formative life and the way I've lived my life now. And thinking about that formative hands-on education that I'm talking about, I suggest that we make sure to perpetuate our citizen education and empowerment work that we already have happening, and also think about ways we can bolster that work. So things like the citizen environmental Academy, continued partnerships with organizations like Bluegrass Green Source, who prioritize rain gardens, native plantings, compost. I know it's part of this bigger picture of health. And I also think that we can share, like Jake did, all of the amazing work that's already happening. So promoting Trees Lexington, promoting the Urban Forest Initiative, and this is something I've talked about on my Facebook live chats recently, Tree Week. These are programs that bring neighbors and leaders together on the ground, and they're very collaborative. And something that I've heard neighbors talk about, it's not just about pocket nurseries and planting new trees, that is important, and that's really good work, but it's also thinking about how do we protect our large healthy trees, especially during construction projects. We've seen a lot of those recently, and council members can help with that. These big trees help define the character in our neighborhoods, and they help the values of our properties, and they also create shade, and they make our city healthier. And in thinking about some of that idea of protection, I think that we can create even better partnerships with organizations like the Fayette County Conservation District and Cooperative Extension, and to help share the programs they already have going on and that help incentivize and supplement yard projects. And again, coming back to empowering our neighbors and friends in the process. So I think a council member can be a big part of that.
Good. Thank you. The next question is about the budget. So, the mayor recently announced some major budget cuts in her proposed budget as the city is dealing with the hit it's taken because of COVID-19. Which items in the budget do you think, should be considered for a cut? And are there any items that you would vote to protect?
Ooh, that's a very tough question, Clint. And I want to acknowledge that no matter how you cut it, but I think no matter how you slice it, this budget is very painful, and it's going to hurt no matter how the final decisions play out. So in answering this question, I want to acknowledge that this is a unique time, and it's not business as usual when we're thinking about the budget. We're in a bit of a holding pattern. We already have a really lean budget. We were already in a revenue deficit prior to COVID-19. So I think that right now we need to prepare ourselves for what comes next. And if things get better, we can talk about how do we restore funding and build programming and partnerships back into the budget. The tough thing is that when we think about revenue generation for our city, we're not in the position to raise taxes, and we only have so many revenue sources to tap into. And so this is a time, and I know our leaders have already been working on this, but this is a time to continue to advocate for bipartisan support in Frankfurt to make sure that the future of Lexington is protected, and to work with our state and our delegation to get more freedom with our revenue streams. So we can definitely look at programs that have already been slated to be reduced, and I imagine that this was a really difficult proposal for Mayor Gorton, and I know it's still in process with our council. Mayor Gorton doesn't have the ability to furlough employees to create any more space or funds. So when we look at these cuts that we have going on now, these painful cuts to affordable housing, Lex Arts, to economic development, I talked about some of the partnerships in there. I would certainly not cut social programs any further. And I really, really struggle with the cuts that have been made in the social service sector, because they provide for the basic needs of so many in Lexington. I am hopeful, though, that, and this has come up in some conversations I've had recently about the budget, I'm hopeful that we will get some federal funds to help us fill in the gaps with some of our current state and local governments. And this is something we can hope for, but I know that it will take time. And in the interim, I think we cannot abandon the essential nuts and bolts of government. And so we're talking public safety, garbage pickup, sewers, roads. Right now, we have to work really hard to protect what's been accomplished thus far. So we think about big projects like Town Branch, about the Civic Center. These are projects that we have to complete, and these are important commitments to our community and to the continued vibrancy of the 3rd District and to our downtown. So I think that, to answer your question, like our attitude as a city and as a governing body has to be about, okay, how can we protect the progress that we've already made in the 3rd District? How do we advocate for change in Frankfurt? And as citizens and leaders, how do we come together to rebuild and support vital programs in the arts and social services and in workforce development, and make sure some of those partnerships are still as strong as they can be, as our economy will at some point continue to strengthen, and then as our options become a bit more clear. And citizen participation, of course, is important in all of this. You know, participatory budget formation is a part of the process, and now's the time when citizens can weigh in.
Thank you. So the next part goes a little bit to economic development as well. What role should the city play in providing opportunities for minority-owned businesses in Lexington?
Yeah, this is something that I have been discussing with community leaders and business owners in the past several weeks, especially. You know, minority businesses are at the forefront in our city. And now more than ever, and we just talked about some of our current challenges, we need to make sure to protect and sustain the businesses that have already been built, and to help generate relationships and coalitions between business owners and between leaders to make our city stronger, and to bolster our community as a whole. And minority-owned businesses are a really important part of that equation. So thinking about that, I think that we certainly need to elevate and continue the Minority Business Accelerator program and support that program fully. We also need to promote Commerce Lexington's Access Loan Program and build more opportunities for mentorship into some of these programs. And that might mean incubator spaces, that might mean public-private partnerships, and it may mean even more intentional relationships with nonprofits. And I also think that we can come together to continue to grow and strengthen a network of champions for minority-owned businesses. And that means acknowledging and rewarding leaders who are a part of this network of champions. And that's both within Commerce Lexington and in other leadership spaces, and really shining a spotlight on folks who are coming together to support one another. And government plays a role in that process. I also, something that I have been discussing with entrepreneurs is access to accurate data about minority-owned business. I think that's really key. And this is something I've been discussing with folks at the Urban League and with other business owners. If we have accurate data and we continue to build studies that show that data and make it public, then the data we have can help us generate additional economic inclusion plans, and we can use that data to help us inform things like mentorship, job training, seminars. So we want to look at some of our existing resources and see how we can create additional points of access to power, funding, and mentorship. And then as we're looking at this data, and as we're creating collaborative plans as a result of our data, you know, we know that like what is good for minority-owned businesses is good for the whole community. So that'll be a very positive outcome of any kind of work that we're doing to elevate minority-owned business.
Great, thank you. So it's projected that the number of households headed by someone age 65 or older will increase significantly over the next decade. How should the city prepare to meet the needs of our growing senior population?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So thinking about this question, I've seen some of the cross-generational work that some of my students at the University of Kentucky have done. And they've done this work at places like Ashland Terrace. And they have focused on really integrating younger and older people in very simple and impressive and positive ways. And I'm answering this way because I think that community is so important to the process of meeting the needs of our seniors. People want to age in place. They want to stay connected to each other and to other parts of our community. And we need to acknowledge in that process of thinking about caring for our seniors that the well-being of our most vulnerable remains interlinked with the well-being and the health of all members of our community. I mean, we're seeing that now, and we already knew it. And so I'm thinking about also spaces of connection like the senior center. So that's like a great place of success. And that's a place that people in my family go, and they talk to me about it and they love it. And I also know that we have budget constraints, but the senior center is great. So I'm in thinking about our other options. We have some zoning opportunities that can help us serve this population. And I've talked about multifaceted housing options, earlier in one of my other answers. I also think there's some possibility for incentives for developers to help us invest in creating vibrant communities of people of all different ages. And, maybe that means granny flats and duplexes. And it also means that making sure that our bus and food systems are as accessible as possible. And when we're thinking about how do we create more options to care for our seniors, I think it also means educating people about elder needs and prioritizing the voices of seniors in this process all throughout.
Okay. So I'm going to combine our last two questions.
Okay.
We're a little short on time, but how would you, as an elected official, engage young voters in conversations about the future of our city? And how would you work to increase just general civic competency?
Yes. Okay. Clint, I'm so happy for these questions. These combine some major points of interest and passion for me. I have taught service learning and civic engagement to young people, most recently college students, in one form or another for almost 10 years. And I think young people and their ideas and their energy are so essential to making forward progress in our city. And when we're thinking about civic engagement and the civic process, I think that civic engagement is not a luxury. I think that the process of government and the way things work in our city should be as legible as possible. And I'm on the board of Civic Lex, which is an organization all about that mission for those reasons. And so when we're thinking about young people or people of all ages and access of information, the same way I think about civic engagement and the engagement of young people, these things are connected because we have to treat young people as necessary and powerful citizens of the 3rd District. And we have to treat all people that way. And so that means we have to connect people to our community. So I'll talk about young people. We have to connect young people to our community. We have to advocate for their voices. We have to find their points of interest, and then we have to connect them to each other and to networks of power, because that gives them freedom to try new ideas. It means believing in young people and nurturing the kernel of their interests and their questions to create initiatives that are robust and impactful. And I've seen this play out with my students. They've started very small, building a garden at a place like Arbor Youth Services, and then they've gone on to make their life's work in hunger and homelessness. It's incremental and sustainable, and it's all about knowledge sharing. And that is how I think about civic competency. It's about building access and building more accessible conduits of information about our city and about how we can make it better. So when people feel educated about the civic process, when they feel educated about their city and their place in it and their possibilities, they feel empowered. And I believe that is a major part of the work of a council member, to render legible the function and practice of government and to get people involved so that we can have an even more vibrant and resilient city.
Okay, thank you. So this is that's all the questions we have. So take a minute or two now to talk a little bit about yourself, anything else you think voters should know, how they can get in touch with your campaign or any of that
Okay.
stuff. So.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you for the extra space. I care about Lexington so much. I moved here 12 years ago to do a couple of terms of AmeriCorps Vista, the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning. And that's when I thought, I want to use this experience with social justice work and with making our community stronger and seeing all the good in our city and still knowing that there are ways that we could do better. We see people around us in Lexington constantly doing inspiring creative work. And when I first moved in here, I met so many amazing people. And I've only continued to meet more over the past decade, and especially during these last couple of months on the campaign trail. I am really curious about people and their stories, and I want to advocate for them. And that's the kind of work that's driven me as an educator and as a board member and as a writer. And I want you to know that my interest and investment in our city is going to drive the work that I do on city council. And my desire to connect with people and to listen to them and to make informed decisions with their input is the type of service I want to do now. And I want to do that as your 3rd District City Council person. And if you're interested in learning more about the campaign, I have a website. It's www.hannahforcouncil.com. That's also my Facebook page. And every Tuesday, we're having Facebook Live conversations with community members doing great work. And that's a really wonderful space for sharing. So if you're interested, that's where you can go.
Hannah, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I know we appreciate it and our voters appreciate it. So to everyone watching, remember June 23rd is the primary. We'll be posting information soon about how to access the absentee ballot so that you can vote safely. And with that, thank you, Hannah, and I'll let you get back to the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Clint. I really appreciate you.
You have a good one.